the Dalai Lama made it to 90 before I did. But this post is taken a while for me to get to because I moved in March and took a while to settle in with my new space for a library and whatnot. And I spent the time kind of just letting things, like following the flow of things, and letting things come to me, and read the Mula Madhya Makakrika and the Madhya Makalankara. And so I just want to get to this. I keep seeing 86s everywhere. Anyway, Hrumachis Equinox. It has been during this 111th year of the Eon of Horus, back in 2016, that I have found and revealed the keys to Liber AL Vel Legis, most of which have not yet hitherto been realized or even fathomed by neither Thelemites of the past or present, nor even the Master Therion himself during his last incarnation. I do not think I am his reincarnation, like some might accuse, and it is beside the point anyway. However, my human identity matters little, as it is the keys themselves which are most important, for they show that indeed the message from Aiwass is not only valid, but still very much relevant and active. And so, before I forget, key I came to find in Sanskrit is Kumji, and it was 444 when I started this, but I had to restart because some sound was on, and I had said His Holiness the Dalai Lama I had found a while ago was 444, but I didn't even time it, but it was when I finally got the ability to calm down, sit down, and start this, it was 444. But so these little keys like have caused a lot of things to stand out, and I'm kind of glad for it. But I even say, like, many will find these revelations too numerous to keep track of via this publication, which is why I've put them all as presently known in Liber 999 or Liber Mayan with a non-final, which I later realized was 999. These keys can only be utilized by those with the proper wisdom and understanding, and therefore I am not too concerned with the uninitiated and ill-guided misapprehending them, as they will justly be further locks rather than keys. The groundwork is being recovered at a pace too quickly to be kept up with in both audio-video format and writing, so I will only here link to the most relevant and recent publication I have composed revealing the key to the art and the art of the key, which has been constructed in such a way as to both attract and repel, and hopefully inspire others to further find their will and apply it from whatever angle they may approach from or not. Hrumachis is the risen Horus of the double horizon, the dual-wanded one who sees both the dawn and the dusk, day and night, life and death, and therefore is representative of the dual or double current of Horus Maat. Infusing these two currents, I have reactivated the gnosis left by Crowley, extended by Frater Achad, and synthesized by Frater Eossic, which has for the most part been left dormant with the exception of a few adepts who have been able to carry it forward in any notable way, rather than merely preserving it through repetition, as if it were a religion merely to be followed instead of a way of life meant to be lived and willed. One of the obvious differences between the OTO and the AA. Being the god of war and bloodshed, Horus is not to be expected as wholly peaceful, and hasn't been, and as the goddess of truth and justice, Ma'at is not always pleasant. There are still many obstacles to confront, perhaps more so than those faced since the inauguration of Horus's equinox in 1904. It is my understanding that the Eon of Ma'at, represent something not only still distant in terms of time span, but altogether removed from the chronological sequence of events as commonly understood and therefore apprehendable by those who can get beyond the double horizon of Thoth. Being the daughter aspect of Tetragrammaton, she corresponds with both the fourth dimension itself, not merely linear time, but the perspective of time from without, or beyond the three-dimensional point of view, as well as the fourth state of matter, generally known as plasma, and therefore also the fourth dimensional plasma beings, generally labeled aliens or interdimensionals, with which I and others are seeking to reconnect with to better navigate the timelines. With the keys thus laid out in this publication of the incoming of the Eon of Maat and the Eon of Truth and Justice, which have been crystallized in Liber 999, those who may carry forward this lineage will be able to better unfold the Diamond of Thoth and formulate the necessary furtherance of human evolution into the future and access the gate opening to the great beyond. And so it's funny because recently 86 has like been in the news or whatever, and public culture, political culture, obviously means to throw out or get rid of. In its streams, I guess it could mean to assassinate, to nix. But it's funny because like I was contemplating, like in my database I knew Tibetan itself was 86, but Tibetan is itself not Tibetan enough, I guess. But then I ended up finding that CCP, essentially, C as Gimel, ABC, P would be 86, the Chinese Communist Party, which, you know, obviously kicked the Dalai Lama out in 1959, where he fled. They didn't really kick him out. They would have killed him like they did the Panchen Lama. And like with dates and stuff, the last post I did was March 10th. This one's March 20th. And I had March 10th, I didn't realize it when I did the post till like the next day. That is the Tibetan Uprising Day. And then, I don't know where it's at, but the Panchen Lama, like last post 85, I had mentioned how 85 is 5 times 17. And apparently he was kidnapped on, okay, so, yeah, here. On 17th of May, of 1995, he was kidnapped. And like 1995 came to mind. I was like, what does 1995 have to do with Tibet? And like, why does it come to mind? And at first I thought Kundun, because I remember watching that, which Kundun, this skew word, is the Tibetan word for body. See, Kaya also, the Kayas. The Kayas would be 111, which is indicative of the three bodies. But body itself is 86, and then the Tibetan word for body is 86. And rarely is that perfect overlap there. I mean, not rarely. It's actually, but it's like bricked, or it's not straightforward. It's like certain words will mesh with, or like equate with other languages' words here and there, but it's like, it's weird. It goes in different directions if you were to map it out. That's not the best way to describe it, but these concepts are weird how it's like a puzzle piece. I say bricks, but it's more like puzzle. But Ace Ventura actually has it like When Nature Calls, the scene where he's in Tibet, essentially. They say Himalayan. It's like not really specified, but his hat is definitely Tibetan. And that was 1995. So, which 1995 is also when like Maat Magic by Nemo was written, mentioning Maat. And 1995 is also when the 5th Dalai Lama's History of Tibet was translated to English, or at least a printing of it was, by a guy named like Ahmed Zaherdan or something like that. It's here somewhere. It's just so much to scroll through. History of Zahiruddin Ahmad. But it was published 1643, and like 2025, 1643. I had noticed that's Manjushri right there. Manjushri. Not that it matters, but it's like I see Manjushri whenever he's there. Yeah, 1995, 30 years ago, seems significant. I don't know why, but really, like, when contemplating some of these terms, it it took a while for them to like set in and then realize how they connect with the other ones. And it's not always. I mean, it actually is pretty straightforward. It's just hard to see how straightforward it is. Um, Sattva itself is also 86, and each one of these words can kind of have multiple meanings or layered meanings. Psychic power, character, even though it also means like purity, existence, reality. So the nature of sattva is also essentially the nature of the Atma Tattva. The Atma Tattva is 35th in the list of the 36 Kashmir Shaivism tattvas, Shiva being the 36th. And the whole question of the reality of the Atma Tattva, which refers to the reality of the soul, is kind of the whole debate between the different schools in Hinduism and Buddhism, really. And the whole, like, Mula Madhya Makakarika kind of questions the basis of it, because it's all about the Pratitya Samutpada, or collective, like, interdependence of things. But it took me a while to realize, and I'll just like jump to the core, I guess, of the realization, which is that the Atma Tattva, which is kind of what is reincarnated, so to speak. At least it's mentioned as like related, not just related, but Malkuth essentially binds the Atma Tattva in incarnation, and so it becomes synonymous with the body. And so it's why it's funny that Atma 51, same letters as Ma'at, Tattva is 86, which is so is body. And apparently, like, in what is it, Jainism, I found this book, The Scientific Foundations of Jainism, and it's actually kind of short, but it's very profound with what I took notes, and then I realized the gematria of the concepts can go a long way, and kind of flesh out, or a lot of the things come to be like perfected again in the triple numbers, like the kayas, which the is obviously an English addition, but then when you again treat all these words as like puzzle pieces, it's almost like the ancient modern being modernized is like, I don't know how to explain that, because it's hard. I've been contemplating like how could this be, like how could ancient unconnected languages be perfected in a way, or like not even perfected, but when I say that, it's because you can kind of like look at the different spellings or transliterations, and then since in early like English writings on these things and translations, there weren't always like exact equivalents. So you'll even see like Krishna with a C and Shakti with a C, and for K, and other little things that with the gematria you can actually kind of like find the perfect spellings, I guess, because how they end up formulating full ideas, like some of them are really just ridiculous almost in how perfect they are, and I'll get to some. But this whole like Jainism, I'd kind of held back on studying it. Like I was familiar with it somewhat, but their whole concept of karma, not just it's not really a simple thing, but it's not so complex that it's unapproachable. But a few of their chapters, this whole karmic fusion, absorption, how karma is absorbed in a sense, and then how you can purify it, purge it and purify it is kind of like what it talks about. And obviously it itself doesn't just reference, but it would be best to read the Tattvartha Sutra of Umasvati. And I wrote down like the main verses from the book that I have of it to actually just read the text itself. And I think it's helpful too. It's hard to say, like, I can't really do justice to how profound I think that the understanding what it says and like how it could actually be applied in almost any system or path or whatever. It's very useful, and almost it brings you back to the point of like whatever you're doing, because so much of what we're doing gets clouded and misdirected, and ignorance becomes almost like a factor that it shouldn't. Sometimes that happens, I swear, like things I was sure of change. But so like 111 minus 86 is 25, which that's how many tattvas they have generally in Samkhya, and then it's in Kashmir Shaivism they add essentially 11, but 6 times 6. So they're, because the 6th element is essentially consciousness arising from the 5 elements, and so that connects with the 666, 1 through 36. But 25 as the 5 elements, yet again relating to the Atma Tattva. There's a lot really there that you could look at. Goya, which I've mentioned before, Goya, like the Goya Samaja. Goya means hidden or secret, is 25, and that's also the nature of the Atma Tattva. Ketu, which is cause, is 25. Devi, which is the goddess, from whence everyone is born, essentially, and goes back. Another thing about 43 I had contemplated is how Gil in Hebrew, or Gilgal is the wheel, and that's 33 plus 33, GL. But GLI, I looked up what GLI would be in Hebrew, and it says age. And so like 2 ages, age to age, or it makes me think of how there's a quote in the Mula Madhya Makakrika about how age doesn't age. But it made me think of how 2 wheels, or 2 ages, essentially 2 life cycles. And so the whole concept of reincarnation, again, of the Atma Tattva came to mind. So there's so much. Pada also, which has multiple layers of meaning, but it means like the base, or also the legs or the feet, really. And it's a type of patterning, in a sense, genitals. So that also connects to the Kani in the symbolism of the stupa, page 64, I remember. This book is very deep, and it's all about the, like, not just the stupa, but really Vastu in general. And I was kind of expecting looking more about the fact that Zenith is 86. The Brahmanic Indra, the divine personification of the regnum, is identified with the central sun and the sovereign breath. He symbolizes the breath as the inner person, Antapurusha, and the inner spirit, Antar Atman, who is the Lord of the breaths and leader of the breaths and of the body, the Lord of all, the Lord of the gods and the Lord of beings. He is the regnant breath, whom all hail as king, and to whom the breaths gather at death, in whom the gods who are the breaths inhere. Whoever speaks, hears, thinks, etc., does so by Indra's ray. He is the inner controller. And it makes me think of Ajna means command center or command. Other than whom there is no seer, hearer, thinker, or knower. The powers, Indriyani, are his subject spirations or breath, prana. Gods or angels, deva, who participate in and depend upon him. And so a prana, which prana is 332, a prana being without air, makes me think of the whole equation with Shivaya, or Shiva, kind of how the letter A is associated with Shiva, but it means emptiness, in a sense, and how A being added to things means not. But A prana, 333, no air. It's just a little thing, I don't know. Gods or angels, Deva, who participate in and depend upon him. They are the Maruts and the fires. Indra is the indwelling and regnant spirit, and even as sparks proceed in all directions from a blazing fire, even so from this prescient spirit the breaths and other substances disperse to their respective stations. The Indriyani are of the spirit. It is the spirit that proceeds in them and controls them. The faculties of the vision, audition, etc. are not ours, but only the names given to the forces that he projects and reabsorbs. It makes me think that of this book I had just now found out about, and so I haven't gotten into it, but it's the Vedic gods as biological forces or something like that by, I think his name is Vasant Rel. I'm familiar with him from his book The Mysterious Kundalini, which I think Kenneth Grant referenced in The Magical Revival. And so he has a book about how like the Vedic gods or the Hindu gods could be veils for like biological processes, which isn't a crazy thought. It's just they wouldn't be limited to only that. But what I'm trying to get to is how the Kani that he mentions right here, just so it's more in context, are the floodgates for the senses, essentially. Kani came to be 86. So again, of like the body, and also the Atma Tattva, these forces. So the outflow of the senses into space from Indra as the regnant spirit corresponds to the outflow of Indra's power and his function as archetypal king, and therefore the Indrajala, the dimensional labyrinth. As king in Divinus, he sits enthroned at the center of the Triatrimsa heaven, surrounded by his 32 attendant gods, positioned around him in the 32 directions of space. The gods are his. So again, it makes me think of the 33 Vedic gods. Vedic itself being 33. And the Vedics 333. I think Sankara. No wait, Sankara. Yeah, Shankara is considered an avatar of Shiva, so his name being 333. It's funny. And while I'm on the topic of the Vedas, which this ultimately led me to want to read the Rig Veda. The Atharva Vedas on my list to get to more seriously as well, but the Rig Veda apparently is obviously more ancient and kind of more central to the whole tradition. And with the Agni Kayana and Fritz Stahl's work that I mentioned previously, which I still am like slowly getting to through all this, trying to find like what to really look for. There's just a lot that this has got me wanting to look into more. What was I going to say about that? I get so sidetracked because it's too much. But it's eventually things find their way back around. So yeah, Indra rules his domain by projecting the law by way of his delegated mandatories into the 32 directions of space, into the outermost confines of his kingdom. He thus puts bounds to disorder and mimetic repetition of the ordering of chaos in the cosmogenesis. The functions of society and the actions of his subjects are thereby this price so small. Oops. The functioning of society and the actions of his subjects are thereby regulated, are measured to accord with the metaphysical paradigms. The terrestrial kingdom of the Chakravartin, king on earth, is structured in accordance with this same supernal model. So instantly, also what came to mind is the whole King of the World, or Rene Guignon's references to, or the Lord of the World, I guess. In an analogous manner, the senses, the powers, are projected out through the portals of the body, the sense organs, from the center of consciousness, the throne of the inner controller, Indra within every man, called the breath, and the solar gale in the Brahmanic texts, and the mind king, the indwelling Tathagata, as Dharma Chakravartin in the Buddhist. The Indriyani are elemental beings, Bhuta, divisions of the great being, Mahabhuta, who is Brahman, breath, or Indra, who, indwelling the secret cave of the heart, looks round about through these elemental beings. They are gods or intelligences, distributive essences. Vibhutaya, whose operation is our consciousness. They are the powers of the soul, the delegations and extensions of the power of the spirit, sent forth by him to do his bidding. And just as the spirit indwells the man, so also do the powers of the spirit. And so again, the Alhim, or the creative powers, Alhim, of course, is 86. And that's a very common gematria. Crowley even obviously referenced extensively. And then 999 minus 86 is Brashith. So the whole concept of the fall comes to mind as well, because garden with the non-final is 913, and then the fall is 86. And that brings up this whole, the back references in the past posts to Golgotha, the skull, and really I ended up finding death magic is 86, and death magic, of course, could have multiple valences. Protective magic, which Tibetan Dharanis and stuff are really, that's one overlap. And then really like voodoo and its connections, it really doesn't have connections to Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, but gematrically have found a lot of overlap. And then how they kind of both connect to earth and the elemental systems. That comes to mind. But so yeah, like the Jainism aspect too, like something about that, it always struck me as earthen, and I may have mentioned it, but probably only once in passing in the last one or two posts. But earthen itself, earthen, sits at 6, and we're considered earthen vessels. But then like the whole concept of Jain elements with a tau, I guess. So Jain elements I found was 6 at 6, but the elemental key to the universe. No, so wait, what was it? Yeah, oh, the elemental key of the universe. So instead of 2, it's of. So the elemental key of the. So the elemental key of the universe sits at 6, and the whole 1 through 36 being the key, the tattvas of Shiva, which there's other little codes like I found, again, all of the elements together, which that brings up the whole this other book with tattva in the name, Tattva Samgraha, which I haven't got to because it's 2 volumes, but now with all this it'll make that more, it'll give me more energy to want to read it. But all of the elements together, which is kind of what Tattva Samgraha means, the compendium of the tattvas, which the compendium of the tattva, and then elements is 204 with the samek, because it could be elements with a shin, can be 444. So those little, again, the keys of the realization of the variations, which doesn't account or allow for like things to be whatever you want. It allows for these specific keys to be what they are. All of the tattva elements of nature. So wait, all the tattva elements of nature. I wrote it small. So I've got notes, but and then in various, it's not here on the list of Hebrew gematria things on the Bill Heydrich site, but I've seen it on different websites that they mention ha-tob in Hebrew, which is nature essentially, or like the nature, is also 86. So the creative forces. And here, where it says Alhim, it says God, goddess, rulers, priests, pluralis excellentiae, or majestaticus, as we, I, God as a sum of forces. Elohim, divine name associated with the sixth Sephirah Tifereth, in place or explaining development of the majestic plural. So, Alhim is the masculine plural of a feminine word or words, male and female gods and goddesses, perhaps a trinity of Mars, Venus, and Mercury, which, again, in the last post, I didn't know this and wasn't even looking for it, but I had found that Mars' year is 687 days. It's Kala Chakra. Venus's is 224, and Mercury is 88. So that's this whole like Mayashin bride number. So 86, the fall, being nixed out, and it being elemental in nature. This whole statue or pillar, and Saturn as an image or idol, which that's Kaf Yod Vav Nun, that's Kaivan, which is mentioned in Amos in the Bible, and kind of like obviously condemned or whatever, but it makes me think of the Tibetan statues and whatnot, especially how to anoint, but then to tingle together and enclose, again, that's the body and tingling together the Atma Tattva, Kavas, which related. This whole 86 complex relates in a sense to 85 and 81 being Pe, or the two spellings of Pe. And it's really like, since in Sanskrit, a lot of the letters have kind of like two, like Ba and Ba with an H, Pa and Fa. Fa, which here it says Fa is regarded as signifying a squall, so a storm essentially. And then it says Fa stands for Futkara, blowing with the mouth, and fruitlessness. Futkara, hissing, whizzing, hiss of a serpent, blowing, puff, so making a crackling noise. And Futkara, it makes me think of Fat, like Om Fat, or Ha Fa, or Fat, I don't remember how. And in Fat, like different mantras and Dharanis and stuff, but it says a cracking. So it says an onomatopoeic word, or onomatopoetic word, used mystically in uttering spells or incantations. In interjection of calling, exclamation of no meaning, forming part of a mantra or incantation, a mystical syllable, a mantra sequence meaning to tear apart or shatter, applied in spiritual practices for eradication of negativity, In Hinduism, fa symbolizes a sacred sound in mantras, embodying potent invocation as well as representing the creation of discord, leading to death and the nullification of positive outcomes. So, death magic. A term associated with creation of dissension, causing death, and nullifying auspicious outcomes. A sacred sound often used in mantras, typically signifying a powerful invocation or breakthrough. So yeah, crack with an exclamation from the Atharva Veda and the Taittiriya. So the fa itself, though, kind of means a high wind, stormy gale, yawning with the mouth open, fruitfulness, an increaser. And this whole thing about it's like a paradox of fruitful or fruitlessness, because again, the Mula Madhya Makha Krika kind of debates that, like the conditions of fruitfulness, I guess, fruition. Increasing, expanding, swelling, gain, useless or idle speech, heat, increase. So it's obviously a bubbling, a blowing up, a blowing into. And said something about bubbling, or no, futkara. The sound of bubbling or breathing into, expression of contempt, kara meaning obviously to make. So, making a crackling noise, fire. And it said the term for like a storm apparently is Janjavata. In this list, this is the chapter 348 of the Agni Purana. I thought to look back at what the fa kind of represents. And so obviously it relates to fought, sort of a rising, a storming, and a stopping. Makes me think of, again, incarnation. The whole 43-43 thing. In the mantra, or Malini Vijayotara Tantra, it mentions fought actually as being 1.5 syllables. And then it also connects to phala, which means fruit. Great fruit of a mantra, desire for progeny, movements of the arm, fruit of an action that goes to the agent. Yeah, and so fruit and action is like one of the whole subjects of the one chapter in the Mula Madhya Makha Krika. And it's kind of like I'm glad it took a while. I took some time between the Tantra Loco that at the time I really wanted to get to the Mula Madhya Makha Krika, but I'm glad I kind of gave myself a break and then allowed it to speak on its own, like have its own voice, I guess, and not be clouded out by all my other thoughts. But so fa, I like to have like the letter or syllable and then the various words that emanate or come from it to associate with it, and that helps memorize the letters. But see, I even tried finding, but it's hard to find. You just have to look in a lexicon or the Tantra Bidana or some other glossary. Oh, and the Sanskrit word for Tibet itself, come to find out, is boat. There's different ways, but see, boat is the name used by ancient India for bod, Tibet, the Tibetan form. But Beth, Hey, An, Teth is 86. So Tibetan itself, while at the time, like when I first considered it, I was like, that's not really sufficient for considering it Tibetan, I guess, but the Sanskrit bot made me rethink that. What it actually made me initially, not made me because I wanted to get to this post obviously anyway, but what I was originally wanting to talk about, I guess, was this book that I got, a set of books from Half Price Books, that had sat there for like 5 years or more. I mean, it's been there since before COVID was manifested, or whatever, however it came about. And they ended up marking it down like half of what it was. And the Wiser Antiquarian Book place had it for sale of it, apparently a long time ago. But it says, blah, blah, blah. An important collection of scholarly texts on the Chinese secret societies known as the Hung Societies from the 19th century through early 20th centuries. And so it's from 1925 through 26. I thought 25, but so 100 years ago. These were most common in southern China, but with emigration they spread globally, and some of the modern tongs and triads are said to have evolved from them. And there's something called Hop Ting Song or Hop Tong Sing, I forgot, in San Francisco, and I mean, really they have them all over, but San Francisco is like a major hub for this whole like Chinese, not just Chinatown, but like, I don't want to say mafia, but these sort of weird groups. But this edition is comprised of the first issue sheets produced by Baskerville in 1925 and 26, and which were purchased by A. Lewis at a later date, circa 1960, who had them bound with his imprint on the spines. Without the suppressed final plate, an interesting dollar note in Volume 3, as issued, the plate was suppressed shortly after the original publication and is rarely encountered, I guess, not being included in the Lewis edition. Loosely inserted is an original color photograph, circa 1990s, of a surviving Hung Society altar. So with the flags, and this book, coming to find it, was good, but I wish I could find this other deeper. It's not really deeper, but I mean, it explains the symbols themselves, like of a lot of these little diagrams and whatnot. But it's Gustav Schlegel's Tian Ti Hui, the Hung League or Heaven Earth League, a secret society with the Chinese in China and India, from 1866. So, and he references it in here, but very light, blah blah blah. So describing that one. But yeah, I found this, and J.S.M. Ward, one of the authors, and along with William Sterling, but not connected to the William Sterling with, I think, E, who wrote the Canon, which is like from 1800s about gematria. But J.S.M. Ward wrote, what is it? Signs and Symbols of Freemasonry, or the Sign Language of the Mysteries. I think it's also printed as, but oh yeah, and Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, which does kind of mention India and Hinduism and Buddhism somewhat. I haven't read Who Was Hiram Abiff, but yeah, the Sign Language of the Mysteries. He was apparently into parapsychology and some other stuff. Spiritualism, I guess. But Freemasonry itself has like distanced themselves from him and says that they're like his books on Freemasonry are his own idiosyncrasies or whatever, his own ideas. But yeah, the Tian de Hui, which it just happens to be 105 apparently, T-I-A-N, which is the 86, the CCP, not literally, but the Heaven and Earth Society, also called Hongmen. The vast family is a Chinese fraternal organization and historically secretive folk religious sect in the vein of the Ming loyalist White Lotus sect, which that's a whole thing to read about, and it does mention it. This book is really interesting though, because it goes into essentially what was the exact coding? Because it's crazy how like actually so many codes regarding this. Not only Society of Heaven and of Earth, it's 666, but Society of Heaven and of, so Society with a Gimel. So it is 167. But and then the rituals of the Hung Society. And so the ritual, as I've mentioned many times, because that goes with the ritual of the Book of the Dead, Freemasonry, and just any general ritual. But the rituals of the Hung Society sits at 6, and then the Triad Society ritual. Oh yeah, so Society there too, using Gimel for C. And it's just interesting because you can break it down in other ways too, and there's so many other little things. Like I've already found how, like, communist religion. So yeah, communist too with a Gimel for C. I'd start out with a Cheth just to see, because sometimes it's like what it is, but sometimes usually like Chinese, like let's see, Chinese Tibetan control. The C for control and Chinese is Cheth, so. But Chinese Tibetan control is kind of what the history of Tibet pretty much shows, that it was a sovereign nation, but they've pretty much incorporated it or whatever. Yeah, there's just a lot of codes. I don't want to make any sort of accusations necessarily that might offend people, but like secret communist is 86 less than 666 CCP, again being, or Chinese Freemason, which is what this whole book is about. Tibetan Chinese Freemason, or whatever way you want to look at it. Like there's different ways you could break it down, looking at these as puzzle pieces. Chinese Freemason death magic. Because this whole thing is basically describing remnants of an ancient ritual itself also. But again, these are just some of the codes for some of these basic things that, and they don't all equal 666, but again, some things seem to focus on that. So I kind of want to just read what this originally says, because well, actually, I mean, holy crap, there's so much from the get-go. But like Freemasonry in the West, the Hung or Triad Society seems justly entitled to claim that it is a lineal descendant of the ancient mysteries. Its signs are of primeval antiquity, but it represents the higher degrees in Freemasonry rather than the craft, in that the main part of the ritual deals with what is supposed to befall a man after death. It has many striking analogies with ancient Egypt. For example, the hung boat is similar to the solar bark of Ra. And just as in the Egyptian Book of the Dead we find that the soul of the deceased is symbolically weighed, so too we find a similar procedure in the hung ceremonies. For all that we are not entitled to assume that the Chinese society is an offshoot of Egypt, it seems much more probable that both it and the Egyptian mysteries have sprung from a common ancestor, and have developed along slightly different lines. By the time my readers have finished the 3 volumes on this subject, they will be able to judge for themselves, and therefore my purpose here is not to discuss this point, which will be dealt with later, but to mention the source of the information now for the first time set out in full. Information about the Hung Society has been all too meager and confined for the most part to brief notices and short lectures by missionaries, whose information was scanty and not always reliable. For example, a paper by the late Dr. Milne, principal of the Anglo-Chinese College, was communicated by the Reverend R. Morrison on February 5, 1825, and published in the Transactions of the Royal Asiatic Society in Volume 1, page 240. Another paper appeared in the same journal, Volume 6, page 120 in 1840 by Lieutenant Newbold and Major General Wilson. There are also a German work by E. H. Rotger and 2 articles by Dr. Hoffman in Dutch. All of these appeared before 1853, which I'm always curious. There's that number that, society that I misspelled. So of all the numbers, it's like that happens a lot for some reason, and that's what causes me to memorize things. Anyway, the most important work on the subject, however, is the Hung League by Gustav Schlegel, which appeared in 1866. So, since then, 2 or 3 other works have appeared which give a few details, but which do not claim to be comprehensive. The most important of these are The Cross and the Dragon by J. Keeson, Freemasonry in China by G. Giles, and The Triad Society by W. Stanton. It should be explained that such a thing as a complete ritual does not exist. The various officers make copies of their own parts, the 2 most important being those of the Master and the Vanguard. In order, therefore, to reconstruct the whole ritual, it is necessary to possess copies of all the various parts, and very desirable to have a series of rituals dealing with the same parts. This latter point is particularly important today because, owing to the fact that possession of the ritual is a penal offense in most countries, the rituals themselves are often not complete, being rather in the form of notes containing the portions that the officer is likely to forget. This is in order to reduce the size of the book and enable it to be carried on the person securely hidden. The first disadvantage Schlegel suffered from was the lack of a complete set of rituals. Judging from what he has published, it would seem that he secured 2 or 3 copies of the Vanguard's rituals and possibly an incomplete Master's ritual. It is quite clear that he had not the latter complete, as he leaves out certain essential portions. Secondly, neither he nor anyone he knew had seen a ceremony. Mr. Sterling has not only interrupted the proceedings and thus had an opportunity of seeing part of the ceremony on many occasions, but his predecessor, Mr. W. A. Pickering, had actually been received as a member and witnessed the entire ceremony several times. This was in the days when the Hung Society was recognized and registered in Singapore. Mr. Pickering took careful notes of the ceremonies, which notes in due time passed into the hands of Mr. Sterling in the course of his duties. And these have enabled us to clear up many complex points. There is a third factor which placed Schlegel at a disadvantage. He had only a limited knowledge of Hung slang and Hung secret writing, and in some cases he totally misunderstood the meaning of certain Chinese characters. This is no aspersion on his knowledge of Chinese for the following reasons. The Hung ritual is full of words which have an ordinary and a special Hung meaning. For example, the word Atasat means 7. This number represents death, but it is the proper name given to the traitor, Atasat, who, according to the traditional history, betrayed the monastery. In consequence, translations by Schlegel of verses which include the word Atasat are quite meaningless, for he did not know the inner interpretation. The same is true in many other instances. A careful study of the ritual which he then had, and a comparison of it with the same parts of the ritual which we now have, show certain interesting developments in the half-century which has elapsed. So he's saying that those symbols aren't always correct, but the fabric in the main is the same, but the members of the Triad Society in Singapore in the course of years seem to have lost most of their interest in the political side of the ceremony, and consequently many verses which in Schlegel's version have obviously been inserted long after the ritual originally took its form have been quietly dropped. Therefore, the Singapore rituals are probably much nearer to the original form than are those given by Schlegel. This fact is very significant, for with the final overthrow of the Manchus, all reason for the political object disappeared, and there seems no good cause to prevent this ancient ritual from being restored to its original purpose and becoming once more a vehicle of mystical initiation and of sound moral instruction. This is a result greatly to be desired, for I have no hesitation in saying that the original object of the ritual had nothing to do with politics. The ceremonies had a threefold purpose, like Masonry. Firstly, to teach sound morality, and more especially brotherly love. Secondly, by a dramatic allegory to indicate what its initiates thought befell a man after death. Thirdly, to give instruction regarding the mystical journey, whose end is atonement with the Supreme Being, by whatsoever name we may call him. Should these volumes fall into the hands of a Western educated Chinese scholar, I would humbly offer him or to him this suggestion. And I don't know if he mentions it in this book as much as Gustav Schlegel does, but there's different spellings or renderings of Shang Di or Chang Di, and they say Shang Ti and Chang Di, or Shang Di and Chang Ti, but if you take Chang Ti, it's 86, and he's like the Lord of Heaven, kind of like Indra essentially. But so should these, although the Hung Society has fallen on evil days, and many of its lodges have passed under the control of the least desirable members of the community, this is no reason for leaving it in such hands. I have studied many systems of initiation and have taken part in many dramatic ceremonies, but I have never seen a greater ritual or one more perfect in all its parts than that of the Triad Society. It bears every evidence of an immemorial antiquity and it still has a great work to do for the aspiring soul. Is there any reason why it should not be reorganized and it once again performed its allotted task in leading regenerated China towards the true light? In this book, the ritual is set out in as complete a form as we can make it, with notes on its meaning and evidence to show the original basis on which it rests. I do not suppose for one instant that I have been able to interpret every point in the ceremony, but I have at least shown its general purpose, and have given sufficient to help those that shall follow after. Just as some Masons have little conception of the full meaning of the Masonic ceremonies, so no doubt it is with many members of the Triad Society. Yet for all that I think, so wide it's hard to... Yet for all that I think there must be some who have a dim idea of its great teaching. Certainly there are men, even in Singapore, who cling to the ancient landmarks. In my possession is a complete set of flags made by hand by some amateur out of colored papers. The possession of such flags rendered those who were found with them liable to a term of imprisonment. Why then did they make them? If the sole object of the society was to band together men into a criminal organization, such flags and most of the ceremony as well would be safer omitted, for they are of no use in furthering criminal objects. Yet for all that this brother had spent hours making them and thereby supplied the evidence for his own imprisonment, it could only be veneration for the ancient landmarks that could lead men year after year to carry on these complex ceremonies under such difficulties. Mr. Sterling considers, however, that an alternative explanation is possible, namely the desire for personal gain. With this in view, the preceptor would wish to impress the initiate with the importance both of the society into which he is being received and of the preceptor himself. Today, throughout the whole Western world, there is an ever-increasing thirst for knowledge concerning the ancient mysteries and the meaning of their Western survivor, Freemasonry. In this age-old ceremony, which seems to have been but little corrupted despite the vicissitudes through which it has passed, students of the ancient mysteries and of modern Freemasonry alike will find much that will help them to understand such information as we now possess. To the anthropologist, it is unnecessary to point out the importance of the triad rituals to all who desire to understand the working of the human mind in its attempt to answer the great problems whence we come and whither we are going. In its blending of magic, religion, and mysticism, it supplies an almost perfect key to the history of the evolution of spiritual and religious thought down the ages. Before concluding, it is but fair that I should answer the very natural query which will occur to many of my readers, namely as to the respective responsibility of the joint authors of this book. For the translations of the Hun ritual and the bulk of the illustrations in the first volume, Mr. Sterling is responsible. Mr. Sterling, after leaving Haro, went out to the Federated Malay States to a rubber plantation on January 1st, 1907, but 2 years later he joined the Malayan Civil Service. From this early youth he had evinced a great interest in the manners and customs of China and the Far East, having joined the Japan Society in London at the early age of 16. During the last 18 years he has been brought into closest contact with Chinese of all classes, and during his researches has on many occasions been to Canton. In 1916, he married the daughter of a well-known Cantonese gentleman, and has thus had a better opportunity of studying the life of the Chinese than most Europeans. As an assistant protector of Chinese, it is one of Mr. Sterling's duties to help in the suppression of the Hun or Triad Society. This has enabled him personally to gain much valuable information. Also, knowing the peculiar interest he takes in everything connected with the Chinese, his colleagues have made a point, whenever possible, of letting him see and study any triad paraphernalia which they may have seized. Being a Mason, he was struck with the numerous similarities which existed between the Hun ritual and certain incidents in Freemasonry. In coming across my book, Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, in Singapore, he noticed my appeal for further information on this subject. Correspondence started between us, and this book is the result. On the other hand, I take full responsibility for all the notes in this book for the history of the society outside Singapore, and for the whole of volumes 2 and 3. My readers may also be interested to know that I have in my possession the actual Chinese rituals which have been translated, and in some cases have had the translations checked by other Chinese scholars. They will thus see that every precaution has been taken to make sure that the details of the ceremony here set forth are as accurate as it is possible for us to make them. So each volume has a preface, and I kind of want to read them because the contents too, I mean, you can just look, each one has quite a bit to it that's multifaceted, but the prefaces are kind of short, and it kind of gives guidance though towards what's contained in each one. So, interest in things Chinese and in the so-called mysteries of the East brought me not long after my arrival in the Straits settlements into touch with the Triad Society, or Heaven and Earth Association. Some things are naturally odd to the Western way of thinking and hard to explain. But after 18 years of a somewhat close and intimate association with the Chinese, I do not find them very mysterious or hard to understand. The Oriental, on the other hand, finds in Western ways and customs many things which he cannot understand, and which to him are odd and mysterious. He tries to understand them, but if he cannot, it does not worry him. A few years after my arrival in Malaya, I became a Freemason, and on taking the ordinary 3 degrees, the Mark and the Royal Arch degrees, I was immediately struck by the very marked resemblance to the Chinese Triad Society. I therefore started more earnestly to collect what information it was possible for me to obtain on the subject of the Triad Society, with the hope that one day I might come across some Freemason who was endeavoring to seek information or compare Freemasonry with other similar associations among the different peoples of the world. I happened to come across a book entitled Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, and while glancing through it, I read the following passage on page 95. I would earnestly ask any brother who is living in China, should he see this work, to endeavor to discover what other signs and grips are in use among the members of the secret societies here, and if he does not wish to write anything on the subject himself, to let me know. Now I do not live in China, but 5 days from it by sea, and though I have been to China, I would not make so bold as to say that what follows herein is common to China, but as the bulk of the population in British Malaya is common to China, but as the bulk of the population in British Malaya is Chinese, I might almost say we are a portion of China. But happily for the Chinese residents here, under the benign government of the British, for if anybody flourishes, it is the Chinese under British rule and protection. Owing to the nature of my duties as an official of the Chinese Protectorate, a department started specifically in the Straits Settlements in 1874 to deal with Chinese affairs, it has been possible for me to obtain first-hand information on all sorts of Chinese questions, and especially on the Triad Society itself, much more than would have been possible for the ordinary layman. I have been able to make a great many notes, collect exhibits, and make impressions from the original seals used by the Triad Society in Singapore up to 1890, when they were formally delivered up to the government in June of that year. Since that date, the Triad Society has been illegal, and in consequence, numerous rituals, seals, and other paraphernalia of the society have come into my hands, many of which are illustrated in this book. Initiation ceremonies are, of course, today entirely illegal, but are held on occasions during the late hours of the night and the early hours of the morning. And when raids are made, there is often an opportunity of witnessing at any rate a portion of the ceremony. But when the Triad Society existed openly, the late Mr. Pickering attended a few initiation ceremonies, but after its abolition by the government, such opportunities ceased. Today, in order to carry out a successful raid, a number of detectives are necessary, as the approaches to the place where the initiation is going on, which is often in the jungle, are generally well protected by outposts. It is necessary quietly to capture the outpost before he can give the alarm, in order to get near enough to the assembly to see exactly what is taking place before the alarm is raised and the members bolt away helter-skelter. Since the late Mr. Pickering's time, other officers have taken his place at the Chinese Protectorate and have done their best to keep the Triad in subjection. But none of them has ever been able to stamp it out. In the course of their work, numerous details as to Triad organization and ritual have come to their knowledge, and much of this information has accumulated and enabled me thereby to acquire additional information over and above that which resulted from my own personal experiences. Among those from whom the most valuable information has been acquired are the late George Thomas Hare, CMG, Walter Peacock, an expert in criminal cases, and the present Secretary for Chinese Affairs, Mr. David Beatty. My thanks are due to Mr. Ho Siak Kwan, OBE, whose knowledge in Chinese matters is unrivaled, who has always cordially helped me in many different points. Finally, I cannot close without a word of thanks and appreciation to Mr. M.S. Nakajima, who took most of the photographs which are produced in this work, and without which much of its value would be lost. And I think I'm going to read this. Introductory essay by A.C. Haddon. A great deal has been written from various points of view about the significance and history of the ritual of British and European Freemasonry, and very diverse views have been promulgated. As is well known, the present form of our Masonic ritual is relatively recent, but there are good grounds for believing that it is based upon rituals that go back to a remote period. The difficulty that always faces the student is the fact that Freemasonry, in its equivalents are secret societies. And therefore, it is not to be expected that the uninstructed and popular world who are not Masons would be enlightened concerning the mysteries of the craft, or concerning those of analogous societies. Those of us who have attempted to investigate the secret societies of primitive peoples are thwarted by that reticence which is inculcated during initiation and is enforced by the threat of dire penalties if at any time the initiate should improperly disclose the secrets entrusted to him. And it is also often happens that the initiates undergo a foretaste of that retribution which forever hangs over them. The initiation ceremonies usually begin more or less at puberty. That is, at a time when the youth is especially impressionable, and the seclusion and mystery, as well as the ceremonies and ritual objects, create a profound and lasting impression. So much so that although certain obvious and external circumstances connected with initiatory rites may be disclosed, or may be seen by the stranger, yet there are sacred words and phrases which are rarely or never divulged. Even when natives become Christians, they still regard the old secrets as sacred, and a conscientious man is not likely to do so or say that which he has promised not to reveal. Even those investigators who have had the best fortune in this respect can never be sure that they have been informed of all that takes place. Indeed, they are generally aware that such is not the case, and furthermore, any esoteric meaning there may be will almost certainly not be communicated. Thus, whether the mysteries of existing backward peoples, or those of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Syria, Greece, and Rome, or the modern possible survivals of them, are investigated, we are always brought up by a dense screen of reticence, through which one sees as through a glass darkly, if at all. The labors of Messrs. Ward and Sterling have opened up a new avenue of approach which has been only imperfectly adumbrated by previous writers, and even Dr. Schlegel had insufficient data at his disposal. Ward and Sterling admit that their material is not exhaustive indeed. It is obvious that the written ritual of a secret society can never be complete, even though more or less obscured by disguised terminology. But thanks to Mr. Sterling having seen parts of the ceremony and Mr. Pickering having been received as a member and witnessing the ceremony several times, a credible account is now presented to students which may be taken as substantially accurate. The discussion of the history and development of the Hung Society seems to establish the fact that the ceremony described is based upon ancient ritual, and the parallels between the working of the Hung Society and our Freemasonry are not due to any borrowing of one from the other, but owe their similarity to a very ancient rite or series of rites. This new evidence therefore supports the position of those who claim a very considerable antiquity for the main elements in the ritual of the craft. The ceremony exhibits an interesting conflict between pious adherence to the ancient landmarks and adaptation to political ends. In the later history of the Society of Heaven and Earth shows how easily politics may endanger or even destroy a cult that was essentially of otherworldly significance. A somewhat analogous change from a religious or quasi-religious organization into a revolutionary political organization occurs in the powerful and mysterious cult of Nagualism, which, as Dr. D.G. Brinton tells us in his Nagualism, Philadelphia, 1894, or Nagualism, for 200 years has united many and diverse tribes of Mexico and Central America into organized opposition against the government and the religion which had been introduced from Europe, whose members had acquired and were bound together by strange faculties and an occult learning which placed them on par with the famed thaumaturgists and theodidacts of the world, or the old world. and which preserved even into our own days the thoughts and forms of a long suppressed ritual. So wait, I have it written down, but I know it's like the Nagual ritual, so the Nagual rite, the Nagualistic with the Gimel. Right. The details of the ceremonies and doctrines of Nagualism have never been fully revealed. It was a perpetuation of a well-defined portion of the native cult, so again like shamanism, whose sources we are able to trace long anterior to the period of the conquest, and which had no connection with the elaborate and bloody ritual of the Aztecs. Whenever in later days the Catholic priests found out the holy places and sacred objects of the Nagualists, they were in caves or deep rock recesses, not in artificial structures. The intimate meaning of this cave cult was the worship of the earth. To the native Mexican, the earth was the provider of food and drink, the common father of all. The numbers 3 and 7 were the sacred numbers. The indications are that the Nagualists derived these numbers from the 3rd and 7th days of the calendar month of 20 days. The Nagualistic rites were highly symbolic, and the symbols used had clearly defined meanings which enable us to analyze the religious ideas underlying this mysterious cult. The most important symbol was fire. Other ceremonies connected with fire worship took place in connection with the manufacture of the pulque or octli, the fermented liquor obtained from the sap of the maguey plant. Fire was worshipped as the life giver, the active generator of animate existence. The idea was by no means peculiar to them. It repeatedly recurs in Sanskrit, in Greek, and in Teutonic mythology. The fire god Ignis, is in the Vedas the maker of men. Prometheus steals the fire from heaven that he may, with it, animate the human forms he has molded of clay. Even the connection with the pulque with the fire is paralleled in Greek mythos, where Dionysus is called Pyrogenes, or Pyrogenes, Fireborn. There is another symbol still venerated among the present indigenous population which belongs to Nahualism, and is a survival from the ancient cult. This is the tree. In the ancient mythology, we often hear of the tree of life, represented to have 4 branches, each sacred to one of the 4 cardinal points, and the divinities associated therewith. The conventionalized form of this tree in Mexican figurative paintings strongly resembles a cross. Thus, the sign of the cross, either the form with equal arms known as the cross of St. Andrew, which is the oldest Christian form, or the Latin cross with its arms of unequal length, came to be the ideogram for life in the Mexican hieroglyphic writing, and as such, with more or less variance, was employed to signify the tonali or nawal, the sign of nativity, the natal day, the personal spirit. What is nawal? I'm just curious. 91 minus 5, so it's another one of those, just 5 away. The belief in a guardian spirit, which is so widely spread in North America, occurred also in Central America. Herrera, 1530, says that in the mountainous parts of Honduras, to these appearances they apply the name Naguales, which is as much as to say guardians or companions, and when such an animal dies, so does the Indian to whom it was assigned. Dr. Brinton says the belief in a personal guardian spirit was one of the fundamental doctrines of Nagualism. The calendar system of Mexico and Central America has one of its main objects astrological divination. By consulting it, the appropriate Nagual was discovered and assigned, and this was certainly a prominent feature in the native cult and has never been abandoned. Nagualism was neither a pure descendant of the ancient cults, nor yet a derivative from Christian doctrines and European superstitions. It was a strange commingling of both, often in grotesque and absurd forms. The conclusion to which this study of Nagualism leads is that it was not merely the belief in a personal guardian spirit, as some have suggested, not merely a survival of fragments of the ancient heathenism, more or less diluted by Christian teachings, as others have maintained, but that above and beyond these it was a powerful secret organization extending over a wide area, including members of different languages and varying culture, bound together by mystic rites, by necromantic powers and occult doctrines, but, more than all, by one intense emotion, hatred of whites, and by one unalterable purpose, that of their destruction, and with them the annihilation of the government and religion which they had introduced. Symbolism is the natural concomitant of a cult, and indeed it is practically the only means by which people unacquainted with writing can express their abstract ideas. It is necessary to distinguish between different kinds of pictorial signs, but this becomes more difficult when the characters have become conventionalized. They may be classified under pictorial signs, emblems, and symbols. The representation of any object when it is pictorial signs, the representation of any object when it is intended to express that object is a pictorial sign. For example, the figure of a fish in a pictograph would usually refer to fish in general or to some particular species of fish. 2. Tribal signs, emblems. As tribal signs, personal insignia, etc. are emblems, and these do not necessarily require any analogy between the objects representing and the objects or qualities represented, but may arise from pure accident. The representation of a totem belongs to this category, so that under certain conditions, a drawing would not refer to any actual fish or imply that the individual was named Fish, but that he belonged to the fish clan. It was emblematic of his clan or family group, like most of our armorial bearings. And 3. Symbols. As Garrick Mallory points out, sign language among North American Indians, first annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology, 1879 through 80, Washington, 1881, page 389, are less obvious and more artificial than mere signs. Symbols require convention and are not only abstract but metaphysical and often need explanation from history, religion, and customs. They do not depict but suggest subjects. They do not speak directly through the eye to the intelligence, but presuppose in the mind knowledge of an event or fact which the sign recalls. The symbols of the ark, dove, olive branch, and rainbow would be wholly meaningless to people unfamiliar with the Mosaic or some similar cosmology. Many pictorial signs can be used as emblems, and both can be converted into symbols or explained as such by perverted ingenuity. An interesting example of the last is seen in the Christian conceit of the portraiture of a fish used for the name and title of Jesus Christ. This is based on the word ichthys, an acrostic composed of the initials of several Greek words signifying that name and title. This origin being unknown to persons whose religious enthusiasm was, as usual, in direct proportion to their ignorance, they expended much rhetoric to prove that there was some true symbolic relation between an actual fish and the Savior of men. Apart from this misapplication, the fish undoubtedly became an emblem of Christ and of Christianity. Conversely, Mallory states that from his personal experience, often when he has at first supposed a character to be a genuine symbol, it has resulted, with better means of understanding, in being not even an ideograph, but a mere objective representation. Pictographs of the North American Indians, 4th Report, 1886, page 222. Sign language. For further illustrations of symbolism, I would refer the reader to my book, Evolution in Art, 1895. Symbolism is not confined to pictorial or plastic representations, but is also expressed by gestures and actions. To take one example, which was shown to me in Mur, one of the eastern Torres Straits Islands, if a man died in the village of Er or Zab, 5 men wearing a particular kind of mask came from the other place to show their sorrow after going through a pantomimic performance relative to harpooning a dugong. They turned round slowly, the left heel being against the right big toe, and looked on the ground. They very gradually raised the fully extended right arm in a semicircle over the head, the index finger at first pointing downwards, then upwards, and finally downwards. Finally, the arms were flexed and the head bent. This movement was said to indicate the rising and setting of the sun and to be symbolic of the life and death of man. From Reports of the Cambridge Anthropological Expedition to the Torres Straits, Cambridge 108, Volume 4, page 135. I do not know whether the left foot being in advance of the right had any special significance. Evidently, the sign of heaven and earth in the Hun ritual and similar signs in other cults belong to the same order of ideas as that just narrated. The sign of fire in the Hun ritual, elsewhere known as the sign of distress, is of peculiar interest. A great many years ago, James Chalmers, the well-known missionary and a Scottish Mason who was himself killed for ceremonial purposes at Dopima, Goribari Island, British New Guinea, told me that he was convinced that something analogous to Freemasonry occurred in New Guinea. He said that on one occasion, I think in the Papuan Gulf area, he was in grave danger of death owing to native hostility, and as a last resource, he made the sign which he firmly believed saved his life. This is the only instance known to me of anything of the kind, and I give it for what it is worth. It is now being recognized that even in remote places there have been cultural migrations from more advanced regions, and I have drawn attention to the migrations of cultures in British New Guinea in my Huxley Memorial Lecture. Journal of the Royal Anthology Institute, I don't know what L would be, but 1920, page 237. There is also evidence for migrations of culture from the north into Australia, which need not necessarily have been brought by any considerable bodies of men. Thus, any given myth or ritual in Australia may prove not to be aboriginal in the usual acceptance of the term, but may be, as it were, an echo of a myth or ritual from elsewhere. One has thus to be on one's guard against assuming that there has been an evolution of culture in Australia, which might result in a convergence towards cultural elements of other countries. We have sufficient proof that this is what has occurred among civilized peoples, and we have merely to extend the same principle to uncivilized peoples. Further research will doubtless reveal the true significance of ancient Egyptian parallels with elements in the hung ceremony. The theory of Professor Elliot Smith and Mr. Perry, as elaborated in The Children of the Sun by W.J. Perry in 1923, would make these due to a more or less direct continuity from ancient Egypt, probably through intermediaries, but on the other hand, the possibility that some intermediate culture must be considered which may have influenced both Egypt and China. So the ritual and all the contents of this book are strictly copyright, etc., etc. So this is where it gets into the actual history, and then gets into a lot more, but I wanted to see what this preface said. This one's pretty short. In this second volume, I've endeavored to show that the ceremony of the Hung Society is an allegory of the journey of the soul through the underworld and paradise to the city of the gods. In order to do this satisfactorily, it has been necessary to collect and coordinate traditions, beliefs, and legends which deal with this theme as found among races in various parts of the world, and in different stages of evolution. The remarkable manner in which certain outstanding features appear again and again presents a problem which will doubtless be answered in different ways by various students. Some will see therein evidence in support of the theory that far back in the distant past there was a great civilization, possibly centered in Atlantis, whence these beliefs and others of a religious nature, together with many social customs, spread among the more backward races who came into contact with this earlier civilization. Therefore, when Atlantis vanished, her heritage was carried by her successors into every corner of the world by cultural migrations. Another school of thought will consider that while there is no evidence at all for the existence of Atlantis, this similarity of beliefs points to a time far back in the past when our primitive ancestors were all gathered together in some central spot. Thence, as they say, spread north, south, east, and west, they carried with them the original basis, which they developed in various ways, but naturally retained many of the basic ideas from which their more complex beliefs evolved. To a third group of students, it will appear that human nature is very much the same in all types of men, and that the human brain always works along very similar lines. Thus, while these various legends may have grown up perfectly independently of each other, this characteristic of the human mind will tend to produce similar ideas, even though there is no intercommunication. Finally, another school of thought will be of the opinion that in the course of ages, members of various races and tribes have come into touch with other groups and have passed on certain fundamental ideas, which, being accepted by those with whom they have come into contact in a few generations, become so welded into the current traditions of the tribe and so colored by local conditions that today it is impossible to identify their original source. My readers will adopt with which explanation most appeals to them, but they will no doubt agree with me in the view that this unanimity of belief on a problem concerning which it is difficult to obtain actual facts is evidence of the truth of the dictum that, despite differences of religion, race, and color, in the fundamentals of life, all the human race is one, and it is no empty saying that all men are brothers, even though, as it is admirably expressed in the Hun ritual, some may be elder and others younger brethren. In conclusion, I have to thank the controller of HM's stationery office for his kind permission to reproduce from Mr. Bushnell's valuable book, Chinese Art, published by the Victoria and Albert Museum, illustrations, number blah blah blah, and also acknowledge a like courtesy of the director of the British Museum, who's permitted the reproduction of numbers blah 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 blah. Without the help of these two great museums, it would have been impossible adequately to illustrate this volume. So, Chinese Buddhism and its influence on Han ritual. So, underworld is conceived by the ancients. Grail legends and the journey through the underworld. And then volume 3, which, going back to this volume 1, there is this diagram that's kind of important for the journey, a triad plan of the mystic journey. I can't find online like a good enough, even the one in the book, these little letters over here are still unreadable, but I haven't found a good quality like rendering of this. But it's where some of a lot of the things described come from. These flags, the turtle comes up in the Gustav Schlegel book. No, that's not it. So yeah, I guess this volume is 1926. In this concluding volume, we shall endeavor to discover the magical significance of many peculiar incidents in the Hung ceremonies, which task accomplished, we can then devote ourselves to a consideration of the mystical interpretation of the rite. Therein we shall discover that, despite the evil reputation which the society has gained, it teaches mystically the bitter experiences and numerous obstacles encountered by the aspiring soul in its journey back to God. Is it too much to hope that the society may arise from the depths into which it has fallen and become once more the vehicle for sublime spiritual teaching to the Chinese nation, and if possible, a common meeting ground on which men of every religion can cooperate in harmony? And I guess the same could be said as like, can humanity be salvaged, refurbished? To the Buddhist and Christian Chinese alike, such a possibility should appeal most strongly, and if one adopted, the Hung society might prove a bond of union between men of diverse religious beliefs, just as Freemasonry does in the West. That this is a possibility most ardently to be desired, no well-wisher of China will deny, and it is particularly an ideal which may appeal to a thoughtful Christian missionary, who, while desirous of converting the Chinese, is anxious to prevent that country from breaking up into a series of warring religious factions. Before concluding, I must express my gratitude to Dr. A.C. Haddon for much kindly assistance and advice, and also to Dr. Giles of the British Museum. At the same time, I would register my indebtedness to the writings of J.J.M. de Groot, Sir James G. Fraser, and the numerous other authors to whom I refer in the work. Finally, I have to thank the controller of His Majesty's Stationery Office for permission to reproduce from Mr. Bushnell's valuable book, Chinese Art, published by the Victoria and Albert Museum, illustrations number 2, 3, 4, 8. The director of the above museum for a like courtesy in the case of numbers 13 and 14, and the director of the British Museum for permitting the use of illustrations number 10, 12, 15, and 21. So, magic and mysticism in the Hung Rite, the vitality of mystery rites, sympathetic and ceremonial magic, the magician as a benefactor. So, kind of going back to just the last post makes me think of vitality being 85, but fire, Tejas, I forgot to mention, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last post, it's 85. And Caitanya, which I'm kind of not familiar with. Caitanya with a gimel, I guess. Caitanya, so consciousness being associated with fire, and essentially the divine fire. I was reading this book, Isidore Kaminsky, an old book on gemstones, and it says in the very first chapter, the study of the precious and semi-precious stones of the earth has commanded the attention of man from the mists of the ages, when, according to Enoch, the angel Azazel came to the earth plane to teach him the use of them. And so post 84, Azazel and Enoch were mentioned, or Uzzah, I forgot how it's spelled, but like Uzzah, yeah. And the whole gemstone or crystals and Ratna gems, Chintamani's. This book I had ended up finding also, and it mentions Charles Stansfeld Jones, Frederick Chod. Oh, and the 5th Dalai Lama, like his birth date's not known, but he did die on April 2nd. So there's that date yet again. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, this Shrine in Legend and Tradition, like the first chapter of that is about the magical tower, the whole tower symbolism, again, of 81 and 85, or 81 through 85. That's kind of what I've been like contemplating. So here it says, this legend is best known as one of the tales in the collection The Seven Wise Masters. Originating apparently in India, these stories exist in early Persian, Arabic, Turkish, and Hebrew versions, passing through Greek, Latin, and Armenian transcriptions into most modern European tongues. See H.A. von Keller's learned introduction to his edition of Le Roman des Sept Sages, Tübingen, 1836. The legend of the magical tower makes its first European appearance in a Latin manuscript of the 8th century, after which it is found in different versions in a number of romances and narrative poems. The story is that in a certain town a magician set up a tower having many wonderful qualities. One of the most marvelous of these was a mirror which shone over all the town and warned the inhabitants in time by reflecting the enemy while he was still at a great distance of any threatened invasion. And so that reminded me of that appendix in The Ancient Secret by Flavia Anderson that sort of mentions like an ancient screen or surveillance of a similar sort, but that can see anywhere in the land. Or like apparently it seemed like it meant like anywhere on Earth, but one of the earliest English versions has it thus: Hit was a main, Merlin he had, and was a clerk, and began a wonder work. He made in Rome thorough clergies, a pillar that stood full hage. Hair well then ani tour, and thereupon a mirror that shone over all the town by night, as hit were daylight, that the waities might see. The watchman. If any man came to sight any harm for to do, the city was warned soon. In a prose version of about the same date, the mirror is replaced by a great round ball of gold. The History of the Seven Wise Masters of Rome, 1885, page 82. For account of other variations, see the Book of Sindbad, 1884, by W.A. Clouston, page 337. And D. Comparetti, Researches Respecting the Book of Sindbad, 1882. And Virgil in the Middle Ages, 1895. And E. du Meril, Mélanges archéologiques et littéraires, Paris, 1850, page 467. And Gower, writing at the end of the 14th century, reverts to the Latin accretion Virgil instead of the Northern Merlin. So Virgil instead of Merlin. When Rome stood in noble plight, Virgil, which was the parfite, a mirror made of his clergy and set in the town's eye of marble on a pillar without, that they by 30 mile about by day and eke also by night, in that mirror behold might her enemies, if any were, with all her ordinance there, which they ain the city cast. Confessio, it's clergy, the learning. The old French poem Ballon refers, while speaking of Rome, to the mirror castle. In G. Paris, Histoire Poétique de Charlemagne, 2nd edition, Paris, 1905, page 251, there's a similar expression in the letter of Prester John. And Sir Giovanni even confuses it with the Capitol. So wait, the pillar of Saturn makes me think of this statue or pillar, and Saturn as an image or idol. To pass the night, to lodge, to stop for the night, to turn in, to dwell. To lack, be defective. That makes me think of the fall of body or mind. Abundance, force, and multitude, to enfold, to keep in, hold in, contain, cup, pelican, cormorant. And Sir Giovanni even confuses it with the Capitol. But all such names of persons and places are not integral parts of the story, being added by able craftsmen for the sake of local color. This is well enough shown by Caxton's translation of Raoul Lefebvre's rendering of the story, in which we read that on the top of the tower of the city, Touraine, Hercules made an image of copper looking in to see, and gave him in his hand a mirror hanging such virtue that if hit happened that only men of war were on the scene in intention to do on harm to the city, so dainly their oust. Oust host. And their coming should appear in this said mirror. The Recueil of the History of Troyes by H.O. Sommer, 1894, volume 2, page 414 through 5, or 15, I mean. Guillaume Bouchet moves the tower still further, writing that the inhabitants of Rhodes could see in a mirror which was hung round the neck of their son or Colossus, the ships sojourning to Syria or to Egypt, mentioned in Les Serres by C.E. Roybit, Paris, 1873 through 82, 6 volumes, volume 2, page 205. By this we are led to the legend brought home from the East, to which Spenser refers after describing Britomart's wonderful mirror in the Fairy Queen, Book 3, Chapter 2, I guess verse 20. I don't know, I really don't know how that book's set up, but see page 32 below. Who wonders not that readers so wondrous work, but who does wonder that has read the tower, wherein the Egyptian Pharaoh, or probably Pharaoh, long did lurk, from all men's view, that none might her discover, yet she might all men view out of her bower. Great Ptolemy, it for his lemon's sake, he builded all of glass by magic pour, and also it impregnable did make, yet when his love was false, he with a piece did break. Rabbi Benjamin ben Jonah, who traveled in the 12th century, writes of Alexandria, here is also erected a high tower called Lighthouse. So again, the lighthouse being 222 kind of connects with the whole Migdal Babal, which is 111. An Arabic minar of Alexandria, on the summit of which was placed a glass mirror. All vessels which approached with hostile intentions from Greece and from the western side could be observed at 50 days' distance by means of this mirror. Benjamin of Tudela, The Itinerary, edited by A. Asher, London and Berlin, 1840 through 1, 2 volumes, volume 1, 155. A native writer has a similar tale, speaking of a king named Saurid, son of Sabalok. 300 years before the flood, he relates from hearsay that this king caused to be made a mirror of all kinds of minerals, in which could be seen all the climates in which there was abundance or sterility. So, like fertile grass or trees and desert. And what new things occurred in all the parts of Egypt. This mirror stood on a lighthouse of bronze in the middle of the ancient sea that was Emsos. In Murtada ibn al-Kafif, La Egypte de Murtadi fils du Gafife of il est traité des pyramides, Paris, 1666, pages 27 and 31 through 32. Norden's account is to the same effect. He places the tower at Alexandria in 50 BC and adds that the mirror had a diameter of 5 palms. Certain authors say it was made of crystal, and according to others it was made of polished Chinese steel or of various metals melted together. Sentinels were placed by this mirror and saw it in vessels when still at a great distance. According to many Oriental writers, says Renaud, this mirror was the work of Aristotle. J.T. Renaud, Description des Monuments Musulmans du Cabinet de M. Le Duc de Blacas, Paris, 1828, 2 volumes, volume 2, page 418. Buffon holds the existence of such a mirror on the Pharos of Alexandria to have been not impossible, and provides a pseudo-scientific explanation rather reminiscent of Porta on how to see in a smooth glass things that take place at a distance and in other places. G.L. Leclerc de Buffon, Ouvroirs Complètes, Paris, 1884, 14 volumes, volume 2, page 401 through 2, and G.B. Porta, Magia Naturalis, so Natural Magic by Porta, chapter 17, 2. Whether this story derives from the same source as the one in the Seven Wise Masters, it is now impossible to determine with certainty, but any other origin is highly improbable. According to Lefebvre, the miraculous tower lasted by an equally miraculous handling of history until the time of Nabucodonosor, Nebuchadnezzar, who deceived the mirror by filling his boats with trees, causing the fleet to look like a forest, and thus destroyed the tower. As for the mirror itself, it was preserved at the beginning of the 17th century in the Abbey of Saint Denis at France. See J. Doublet, Histoire de l'Abbaye des Denis in France, Paris, 1625, page 347, where it was seen by Evelyn halfway through the century. John Evelyn, The Diary, edited by A. Dobson, London, 1908, page 28, 12th of November, 1643. So that's the same year that the fifth Dalai Lama wrote that history I mentioned. And according to M. Anatole France, that most laborious and accurate historian, it is still shown in a certain Italian city, l'Île des Penguins, 3-6. So I found that interesting because the whole thing about optics, catoptrics, I don't know. It goes back to show like the ancientness of things and the perpetuity of symbolism. But yeah, this whole 86 thing and the body, the mind, or Amatattva, Sattva, and how it all like, I don't know, I just followed this little thread and wondered where it would lead. This White Lotus Society, when you read about this is, I mean, it really goes far back, but I'd never heard of this Queen Mother of the West, but it's associated with Taoism. In Chinese Salvationist religion, she's believed to be the same being as their main deity, Wu Sheng Lao Mu, birthless Old Mother, also known as Wuji Mu, Infinite Mother. The title Wuji Mu signifies the absolute principle of reality, or the creational origin of all things. Tang writers called her Golden Mother of the First Ruler, Golden Mother of Tortoise Mountain, etc., etc. Queen Mother, Divine Mother, simply Nanny. One of her symbols is the Big Dipper. So Ursa Major, Typhon. So going back to the White Lotus Society or White Lotus teaching, the White Lotus, symbolic in many different aspects, but refers to a variety of religious and political groups that emerged in China over many centuries. Initially, the name was associated with Pure Land Buddhist organizations that sought to promote devotional practices centered on rebirth in a Buddhist Pure Land. So this whole concept of Shambhala, heaven, these early societies emphasized spiritual salvation through faith, chanting of Amitabha's name, Nianfo, and adherence to moral precepts. So monasticism, essentially. Over time, however, the term White Lotus became associated with diverse salvationistic and apocalyptic movements, often blending elements of Buddhism, Taoism, and Chinese folk religion. Many later White Lotus groups adopted millenarian ideologies, predicting the imminent arrival of a new age or a divine savior, mainly the future Buddha Maitreya, to rectify social and cosmic imbalances. And so this is obviously a pitfall that any religion can, I mean, not any religion, but at least certain aspects of messianic and whatnot interpretations. These movements frequently arose in times of political turmoil, natural disasters, or social unrest, positioning themselves as vehicles for both spiritual liberation and socio-political reform. As White Lotus sects developed, they appealed to many Han Chinese who found solace in the worship of numerous deities like the Queen Mother of the West or Birthless Old Mother. A few of these groups even supported armed rebellions against the Chinese state, such as during the Qing-era White Lotus Rebellion, 1794 to 1804. So, it was what, 221 years ago? Beginning 231, really. The religious background of Pure Land White Lotus societies goes back to the founding of the first White Lotus Society by Lian She in the Donglin Temple at Mount Lu by Lushan Huiyan. Huiyan came to be widely celebrated by later Pure Land Buddhists in China as the first patriarch of Pure Land. So yeah, the Pure Land and Shambhala, I should have said, instead of heaven, but it's the same analogy, but to me, like, I don't know why, but Vesna Wallace, she has some lectures on Kala Chakra in Mongolian, or the Mongolians' Kala Chakra, and it along with some of the codes and like keys I've been finding, and had come to find, especially after on March 21st of this year, which a whole year had passed since something significant in 2024, that caused me to see that data as kind of like a sort of finish line in a sense, or like the Four of Wands as that sort of finish line. In my mind, like as a personal thing was there, but then come to find out, I forgot the guy's name, but I reference it. The guys who said that the Kala Chakra was off by the translation by 200 years, and that it technically ends this year on that day, which at work, like all of a sudden, they had me start taking the times of things on that day. It only lasted for a little while, but I found it significant 2 months ago or whatever, 3 months ago, how they instituted the Kala Chakra on that day, even though it's so to speak came to an end in the metaphysical, like whatever. It was like it was just like a new order had started at my job even, and I was like, wow, if only they took my advice from where I was working before and had done this to begin with. But it was just funny, like, again, it was like the not twilight language, but a perichoresis or overlapping of worlds, a world within a world, so to speak. And really, like, March 14th of this year was like a turning point, and that was, I guess, exactly 7 days before March 21st. I was thinking of it as Pi Day, and I don't know, maybe makes me think of the spiral and in the Kala Chakra. And every day, like I'd mentioned, like every day has been, I don't want to say a holiday, but significant, pivotal, and yet time has been going by very fast. Like it's already July, and I was just talking about July in the last post, but I'm going slow. But I'm like taking all this stuff in, collecting all the books that I can of the things that are relevant, and working through this as I'm being guided, I guess. I don't want to say guided, it sounds crazy, but I see the physical, like, thread. I see it physically. So, like, it makes me think back to post 60 when I was, like, guided to find the Sri Guru Granth Sahib of Sikhism, and realized that that guru was that sort of guiding force. And so I don't know, I've just been like trying to figure this out, but I want to get through with this. I really want to get to the last like 12 posts that I did, because those were the most what I felt like I got to like a certain layer that I wanted to move forward with, but I felt like to do so I had to really like go back and review all this. So that's what I'm doing. It's just taking forever. Let's see, what did I forget? I don't know, this symbolism of the stupa is so deep, and it kind of, I don't know, I wish I could go more into it, but there's just so much. This whole heaven and earth connection, Atma Tattva and body, the zenith, it references all throughout here. Zenith is up, from which the fall happened. Speaking of like Tibet and the fall and the zenith, the peak of Mount Everest I came to find was 666, although I think the summit, like there can be many peaks on a mountain. It's the summit that is the main highest point, but Mount Everest, like the main peak, is the summit. But Mount Meru being 251 is the same as Dharma. What was that? Meru and Shambhala. The spelling I found of Shambhala, which may have not have found it. I may have made it up, and it made me misspelling. But Shin, Hey, Aleph, Mem, Beth, Aleph, Lamed, Aleph, Hey, which is equivalent to death with a Tau. Death in Shambhala being death itself, not being Shambhala, but the doorway in a way too. But Shambhala and Meru together like that. But then I'd found, what was it, Free Tibet, it's 251, Free Tibet and Shambhala together. I don't know, there's just like some weird stuff. Really, I actually have so many codes regarding Shambhala. That's what I was looking at, but I got like overwhelmed because it's, oh yeah, Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara. Oh yeah, with the Hey, but not with the Shin, just, which Avalokiteshvara is like the male form of Guan Yin, which is also Kannon, Kannon. Together, Avalokiteshvara and Kannon make 666. Yeah, it caused me to remember kind of the goal of this post, which is just to show the link, the unobvious link between the body, skew, and sattva, the kayas, and the Atma Tattva, and how it also, like, another analogy for the Atma Tattva and sattva is zero and its duality, not just in the 0 equals 2, but it's hard to give an analogy, but like, think of license plates, which I've referenced so many times. When you see a number and you see 0, that 0 is not nothing, especially in numbers, like in bank accounts. Zeros represent, like multiples, essentially, decimals, exponential growth or whatever. And so there's a difference between 0 and like when there is not a number there, or when there's, I wouldn't even say a negative, but there's dimensionality, or there's a dynamism to what we call 0 versus actual absence or nothingness. And I think if you can grasp that, then you can grasp what they say is ungraspable, such as samadhi or kether. But I don't know, I've said too much about it all. I just been meditating or really deeply, just unstoppably thinking about this stuff. Shambhala. Oh yeah, and Shangri-La, which is like more popular, I guess, probably because it's fictional. Shangri-La itself is a fictional place similar to Shambhala, but it's from this Lost Horizon book from 1933. It makes me think of what it was just talking about, the event horizon. But Shangri-La has become synonymous with any earthly paradise, particularly a mythical Himalayan utopia, an enduringly happy land isolated from the world. Ancient Tibetan scriptures mention Nige Bayul Kembalang, one of 7 utopian bayuls, hidden valleys, which Tibetan Buddhists believe were established in the 9th century CE by Padmasambhava as hidden, sacred places of refuge for Buddhists during times of strife. Oh yeah, here's the popular culture. Searches and documentaries. Well, that's not popular culture. I thought it was going to be, but oh yeah, ICP. Himavanta, that's very similar. Xanadu. Where's Xanadu from? Mongolia. Anyway. Oh, and about this Kundun movie, I guess, the film was buried by Disney, which limited the release in order to minimize the damage to the company's relationship with the Chinese Communist Party, resulting in less than $6 million in limited U.S. distribution. Kundun was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, blah, blah, blah. The website's consensus reads, hallucinatory but lacking in characterization. Kundun is a young Dalai Lama portrait presented as a feast of sight and sound. I don't know, I remember it, but I kind of was bored. And I never did see this book with Brad. Book. I know it's a book, but yeah, this memoir of the same name. But I've never seen this movie. But, of course, as this film was being released, it was condemned by the government of the People's Republic of China, which stated that communist Chinese military officers were intentionally shown as rude and arrogant, brutalizing the local people. The Chinese government also decried the film's positive portrayal of the 14th Dalai Lama. All future films produced by Sony were banned from playing in China, sending a message that the party would punish studios and their parent companies that made movies it did not like, even if they were not ever planned for release in China. Anand, Pitt, and Thulis were initially banned from ever entering China. However, Anand was since welcomed back to China in 2012 to chair the jury of the blah blah blah. And Pitt subsequently visited in 2014 and 16. Sony was able to resume business in China by 1998, having appeased the Communist Party through initiatives such as inviting Chinese filmmakers onto their lot in order to boost their exposure, lobbying for China to become a member of the World Trade Organization, and taking executives on an apology tour around the country. So, it's like one thing, I think China and Chinese people are okay and cool, but the government is obviously a whole different thing to bow to. So, with that being said, happy birthday, Tenzin Gyatso. And free Tibet.